I'm just going to talk a little bit about some of the research that we do in TILDA. I'm not going to get into the real weeds of stuff, but if there's any questions of anything that I've touched on, or if you're interested in some of the research that I haven't touched on today, please feel free to get in contact. Aoife and Grace both have my email, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions. So just for those of you who don't or aren't familiar with TILDA, it was set up by Roseanne Kenny originally in 2006. So her role primarily is as a consultant geriatrician and also as Professor of Medical Gerontology here in Trinity. She's also been recently appointed Regis Professor of Physics in Trinity, and she's also has been a previous president of the IGS. So TILDA has been collecting data in the main since 2009. So how we worked to collect this data, originally when we collected our base sample in 2009, was we had a list of addresses from all over the country, but we didn't know the characteristics of the people who were in the addresses. We randomly selected clusters in each local electoral area, and we stratified for things like urban versus rural breakdown, socioeconomic status, and this is all garnered from the census data. The idea was that everyone in the country had an equal probability of being selected to be approached to join TILDA, and we had 640 clusters which had 40 households within each cluster, which meant that we had 25,000 addresses that our interviewers had to go out and call on participants to see if they would be interested in joining the study. So we don't take volunteers is the point. We can't recruit volunteers. We have to pre-select addresses because we're dependent on the stratification in order to be representative for the study. So as I said, in the original wave of the study, we had 8,504 participants, and of that, 8,175 of the participants were age 50 and older. The discrepancy there is spouses of participants were also welcome to join the study, and the spouse could be of any age. So some participants had spouses aged younger than 50. Our response rate was about 62%, and we have representative for 1 in every 156 adults age 50 and older, and we repeat our assessments every 2 years. So we have a number of different modes of assessment. Every wave we do a computer-assisted personal interview, which takes place in the home face-to-face. It covers a broad array of topics, which I'll talk a little bit about in a second. We also have an optional self-complete questionnaire, which is more kind of detailed questions about things that you might not be comfortable answering face-to-face to a person. So things about your relationship qualities with your spouse and children, whether or not you've experienced any childhood adversity like poverty, physical or sexual abuse, your alcohol habits, and then some maybe psychometric measures that work better via pen and paper administration. And finally, we also offer a health assessment to all our participants, and it's completed either in the centre, or we also offer to send a nurse to the participant's home to complete a shorter version in their homes. We have a number of different types of interview that we can facilitate. So what we try to do is to accommodate all needs, in that we can have our participants who can complete a self-interview. If they need, they can be assisted by a friend or family member. For participants who've transitioned into a long-term care facility, we'll also provide facilities for that interview to go ahead. And for participants who, for example, may have lost the cognitive ability to complete the interview, what they can do is nominate a proxy to complete the interview on their behalf. And we also complete an end-of-life interview for people who've passed away while in the study with a family member or friend, and it just gives us information about the end of their life. As I said, the CAPI covers a broad array of topics, and we ask everything you can possibly imagine, well, we think so at least, on things related to health, social and economic circumstances. So we ask about your medical history, what kind of healthcare provision you require, have you had any visits to the hospital, have you had any overnight stays, what services do you use, like GP, physiotherapy, OT, podiatry, etc. What's your job history, your income and assets, the estimated value of your home, estimated value of any other assets or income, what your pension setup is like, have you any plans for your retirement. We ask about your social connectedness in your neighbourhood, what your neighbourhood environment is like. Do you have any carers that come into the home? Do you have any care that you provide to other people? And we ask a broad array of things around mental health, depression, anxiety, and we also do a broad array of health assessment suites as well. So I'm not going to go into everything in detail, but suffice to say that participants stay with us for about 4.5 hours. We do a broad array of cognitive assessments, cardiovascular assessments, mobility assessments, vision and hearing assessments, and we also offer an oral health assessment, and we do provide participants questions with the option to give us a blood or buy a sample as well. So all that to say that we have a lot of data on aging, and we have some findings that have kind of come out from the study in recent years. I've tried to kind of distill them down into easy bite size, something that's easily delivered in an hour. So as I said, if there's anything that I haven't covered and you're interested in, please feel free to get in contact. But I have one quiz that I would like everyone to participate in, and Aoife very kindly has created a poll. So of these two people, who do you think is older, either Dolly Parton or Donald Trump? And I'll give you 10 seconds to answer. The votes are coming in. Okay. Okay. Another 10 seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, well, the results are actually very interesting. It's even between Dolly and Donald. I don't know if you can see that. Hopefully you can. But the actual answer is Dolly. So they're actually pretty much the same age, but Dolly is about 5 months older. So the next one, who is older, of Pierce Brosnan or Liam Neeson? And I'll give you another 15 seconds to answer this one. Hopefully this one is a little bit trickier. Okay, so votes are coming in. Okay. Very interesting. I'll give you 10 more seconds. There's a couple more people to come to give a response. Okay, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so most people think that Pierce Brosnan is older, but actually it's Liam Neeson. So he's a little bit young. He's a little bit older than Pierce. He's only about a couple of weeks, really. But it just showed, I suppose, the point of that poll and to show you the discrepancy between these people is the difference between what we call chronological age and biological age. So in TILDA, we're very much focused on biological age. So the difference between the two is that chronological age is just very simply the number of candles on your birthday cake, so what age you are in years, versus the biological age is the age of your DNA, your cells, your tissue, and your organs. So in TILDA, we do a lot of work characterizing biological age. So we've done a lot of work around epigenetics and DNA methylation. And if you want a kind of an exemplar of what the kind of essence of biological aging is, if you think about a set of identical twins, so the study in the UK called Twins UK, and they specifically go out to recruit identical twins, and they want people who are genetically identical at birth, and they want to see how does aging or life experience effectively change your physical or genetic signature as you get older. So when two identical twins are born, they're effectively identical in terms of their genetic signatures. They have a very similar early life in terms of their environment. And things, they look quite similar as in their youth. But as they tend to get older, they might have diverging socioeconomic or health circumstances. They might partake in different health behaviours, different income and occupation, different levels of education, and they might arrive in different neighbourhoods as they get older. So as they age, their DNA methylation and their genetic signature tends to kind of diverge from one another. And this is where we see, I'm sure you've seen pictures on the internet of sets of twins. For example, one is a person who's been exposed to more sunlight than the other, and they look very physically different. And this is a kind of an environmental factor that affects your biological aging process. So this is where we think about the heterogeneity of aging. So why some people experience what we'll call accelerated aging, whereas other people experience decelerated aging, and why a person would experience one over the other. So there's certain factors that can accelerate your aging process. So like negative influences would be being sedentary, lack of sleep, smoking, poor diet, experiencing chronic stress, whereas positive influences would be things like partaking in regular exercise, physical activity, good quality sleep, appropriate nutrition, and obviously relaxation techniques, which is kind of a purpose of this kind of a webinar. So aging in Ireland. So what do we know about the demographics in Ireland? So we know that by 2042, the proportion of the Irish population aged 65 and older is going to increase by almost 60%. So this is a huge challenge that faces Irish society, not only in an individual level, but at a country level and a governmental level. And we do have, there's obviously been stories in the media about this and all the challenges that come with it. But this is an opportunity for change. And this is kind of how TILDA looks at it, is that we can think about more appropriate ways to orientate our physical environments and housing for older adults. Even now, we know that new builds, as of 2017, have to have accessible bathrooms downstairs. So small things like that are kind of looking to the future to be able to provide services, transport, housing, and any kind of social needs that are needed for this changing demographics and population. So other things that we might look at as well for the future is the development of primary care services, chronic disease services, and precision medicine, and also to rethink what we think about retirement. So most of us probably in our working lives will not experience the same level of state provision that's experienced by 70 and plus year olds nowadays, because the state pension just won't be able to be funded because there isn't enough young people coming up in the younger age groups to be able to fund something like that. So this is where TILDA comes in. I suppose we need high quality data on older adults to inform policy and research in aging. Because we're obviously representative, we're large scale. The idea is that if it's happening, if what we see is happening in the TILDA population, then it's happening in the population at large. So we do have an extensive breadth of data that we've collected. So the reason that we collect longitudinal data and we don't just go out once is because the benefits of longitudinal data can be seen at both individual level and also population level. So we can, for example, see the effect of what happens before and after retirement. For example, a lot of people would move home as they get older, the development of an illness, and also a huge event in a lot of older adults' lives is the development of the birth of their first grandchild. And at population level as well, we can see the effects of things like the economic recession. So, for example, GP entitlements changed around the time that the economic recession was ongoing. We were able to see the effects of that in the TILDA population, in that they were less likely to visit their GP when their entitlements went down. And then we had data that we could collect before, during, and after the COVID pandemic as well. So the idea is that we could maybe hopefully inform, if a future pandemic were to arise, that we'd have high quality, rigorous data to be able to inform policy in the future. And then on top of all this, we're looking at the biological aging process. So what I was talking about, the different behaviours, exposures, environmental factors that might affect your aging process. Okay, so another little quiz. So what do you think, what percentage of aging would you say is determined by these genetic factors versus the factors like your environment, your behaviours, society that you grew up in? So the options are 80%, 60% determined by genetic factors, 40%, 20%. Okay, so good answers across the board. Okay, I'll give you another 10 seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so interestingly, pretty much no one said that it's 20%, and that's actually the correct answer. So about 20 to 30% is determined by genetic factors. So what we can say is that about 70 to 80% of aging is determined by lifestyle, behavioural, and environmental factors. And as well, in there's a kind of a conceptual idea of the fears associated with aging, and these are by no means research based. This is just kind of anecdotal phrases that I've pulled from things that people would kind of talk about in the media. So fears around losing your independence, not being able to recognize family, not being able to take care of myself, not being able to get around, losing loved ones, illness, disability, and physical changes outside my control. But a lot of that can be distilled into what we consider both physical decline and cognitive decline. So a lot of those things, if those things could be mitigated, there isn't that much else to kind of really worry about, other than that you'd be able to obviously manage your finances independently. If you had cognitive ability and if you had physical abilities, you'd be able to manage your personal life, your ADLs, and all that kind of stuff. So interestingly, we've looked at the relationship between factors associated with your health perception in TILDA. So what we've done is we've taken an aging perceptions questionnaire, which is ask participants how they feel about aging. Do they think of it as a negative or do they think of it as a positive? And what we've done is the people who have answered in the more negative aspects versus those who've answered in their positive aspects, we've compared their timed up and go score, which is effectively a walking speed assessment. But what we see really, really interestingly is even if you adjust for all covariates like age, educational attainment, when people have a negative perception of aging, 2 years later, their walking speed is slower than the people who have a positive associated with aging. So it's not a chicken and the egg thing, in that the negative perceptions of aging precedes the slowing down in the walking. So this talk, we kind of think about the psychological state that people are in when they answer these questionnaires, and how does that maybe, is there a kind of a back channel effect on their ability to mobilize their motivation factors, and that might tie into things like their mobility, their grip strength, their muscle mass, all that kind of stuff. And similarly, when we looked at cognition, so we assess cognition via verbal fluency assessment, which is asking participants how many animals they can name in a minute, and how they self-perceive their cognition. When we compare that to the same health or the aging perceptions questionnaire, what we can see is that the people who have negative attitudes to aging as well, 2 years later, have worse cognitive function compared to the people who have positive associations with aging, positive attitudes towards aging. So this is a really seminal paper for TILDA, and it just, again, it demonstrates the importance of your psychological state and how you think about aging. So what influences aging? Because there's kind of this misnomer out there that it's just predefined and it's just destiny and it's whatever happens, happens, and you just have to get on with it. But that's not actually true at all. We know that people who perceive aging more positively are more likely to engage in preventative health behaviours and have fewer functional limitations and live longer overall. So the old adage that age is an attitude is 100% true as per TILDA data. So when we think about aging or biological aging, we think about it as a kind of a pension plan, in that the dividends, or what you put in now, will pay dividends as you get older. So even things like, very simple things like limiting your alcohol intake, sunscreen every day, have protective effects against a lot of the different risk factors. And obviously quitting, ideally quitting or curbing your smoking and vaping, it can have huge implications for your health down the line. And I suppose there's a disconnect sometimes in that people think, oh, up to age, give me any age, oh, I can behave as however I want, and there won't be any consequences as I get older. But the more you do now in your younger years, as I said, it'll pay dividends as you get older. So what we think about is modifying the modifiable. So as I said, 70 to 80% is environmental and lifestyle behaviours that can affect your aging or your biological aging process. So the big thing is a positive attitude. I know that sounds really twee, but the data does support that. Regular multimodal exercise, which I'll talk about in a second, adequate nutrition, good sleep, creativity and creative pursuits, socialising and volunteering are hugely important. Thinking about your retirement in advance and what you want to do, and financial planning for the future. And one thing that we found really interesting, which was actually commissioned by our participants, is the importance of pets, which I've just put in as a little kind of a nice ending note for this presentation. Now, as I said, these are the things I focused on for this talk, but this is by no means exhaustive. So if there's anything that you're kind of interested in, you can just always reach out to me. I really, really like this paper that came out a couple of years ago by, it was the Lancet Commission, where they looked at the breadth of risk factors associated with the development of dementia prevention, intervention and care. It's something that we share a lot with our participants, because again, a lot of participants would have this kind of perception that dementia development and Alzheimer's disease development is just predetermined. But there's so many factors that can be modified through behavioural changes, early medical intervention. So you can see there on the diagram on your left. So things like hearing loss are risk factors that can be modified with hearing aids, alcohol intake, obesity, hypertension, all things that are very modifiable through diet and exercise. Smoking obviously is modifiable. With intervention, you can modify depression, social isolation. If it's flagged and if it's identified, there can be an intervention. Physical inactivity, obviously, and diabetes are all potentially modifiable. So a good proportion of the risk factors associated with dementia prevention, intervention and care are associated with modifiable risk factors. And really interestingly as well, this is kind of a Venn diagram from that paper. I'm sure some of you have come across it before, but this is where they looked at kind of how you could address these risk factors and how you could, what would be the most kind of all-encompassing treatment you could apply to try to address some of these risk factors. And as you can see, the central treatment is exercise. Exercise and diet are probably the two most prominent modifying behaviours that can be associated with reducing your risk. So things like, and in addition to that, things like stopping smoking, social network, depression, preserving your hearing. So again, that's early intervention about hearing loss, the use of cognitive training. So keeping your mind, brain active through creative pursuits, the treatment of diabetes, hypertension, serum cholesterol. So that could be either medication or behavioral modification. And then things like brain damage, vascular, neurotoxic and oxidative stress, reducing the input of toxic substances or alcohol or things like that. So you can see that a lot of these things are really modifiable and they're totally in our control. So I think that's a thing to note. So when we talk about multimodal exercise, there's a number of different modes of exercise. So we talk about aerobic or cardiorespiratory fitness, balance, strength and resistance, and flexibility. So I'm sure some of you have come across the recommendations before about the 150 minutes per week of minimum of aerobic physical activity or cardiorespiratory physical activity. So that's a minimum recommendation. But there's also other recommendations that are not as necessarily talked about in the media. So things like your strength and resistance training is really, really important. And I'll talk about that as well in a second. So about 2 to 3 days per week of resistance training. Again, for balance, this affects things like your falls risk as you get older. Your ability to live independently is hugely associated with balance, and flexibility is hugely associated with your ADL. So all these three modes of exercise are recommended about 2 to 3 days per week. So again, it doesn't mean that you have to go out and run a marathon. It just means that you're not, their heart rate is slightly elevated for about 150 minutes per week. So something as simple as going out for half an hour walk a weekday, a few weekday evenings, and maybe one weekend evening as well. So a 30-minute walk can help manage things like your blood pressure, cholesterol, diabetes, and overall disease risk. And even if you do have things like joint pain or arthritis, so non-weight bearing exercises can be hugely beneficial. So things like cycling is really beneficial as well. And as I said, it doesn't have to be this dramatic life change. You don't have to go out and pay hundreds of euro to join a gym. Just walking around your neighborhood in the evenings if it's safe to do so. So another quiz, sorry, I think this is the second last quiz. I'm sure you're sick of quizzes at this stage. So what age do you think, as a result of natural aging, do we start to naturally lose muscle mass? So your 20s, your 30s, your 40s, your 50s, or your 60s. So a couple of answers across the board. Okay. So this is the age where, without any intervention, without you going to the gym or doing any resistance training, your muscle mass would start to gradually decline. I'll give it a few more seconds. Okay, so most people are actually kind of in the right region. So it's about your mid-30s roughly is when you start to naturally lose muscle. And this is where we think about aging as a lifelong process. So you start aging from the minute that you're born. So there's a lot of things that kind of accelerate and peak in your 20s, 30s, plateau for a while, and then start to decline. So aging is not just about decline, it's about the improvements, plateau, and the decline. And sometimes it's not even a decline. Sometimes things get better as you get older, which we'll talk about later. But aging is a lifelong process. So as I said, what you do now will pay dividends as you get older. So muscle mass is really, really important as you get older. And as I said, maybe I'm preaching to the choir with this group, but some groups that I go out to they're not as familiar with the idea of resistance training and the importance of strengthening exercises. So this is a kind of a graph that represents grip strength, so tested grip strength, which is a proxy measure of muscle mass that was done in the UK a few years ago. So you can see that, well, obviously females are less strong than males, and that's just we're physiologically less muscle mass. There's nothing we can do about that. But the pattern of the graph is that rapid incline in the graph as you get stronger into your 20s, into your teens and 20s, a plateau in your 30s, and then a kind of a very gradual and slow decline as you get older. And then it starts to kind of increase in acceleration as you kind of get into your 60s, 70s, and 80s. So this is the pattern of muscle gain and loss as we age. So the really, really important thing about training as you get older is to incorporate some strength training into your exercise. And again, it doesn't mean that you have to go out and join a gym or anything like that. This can be exercises that you might be able to do at home. You buy a couple of sets of weights from Amazon, or you can just join like an exercise class in your neighborhood. But to incorporate strength training is really, really important. And it's not just about your muscle mass, but think about yourself in your 70s, 80s, and 90s. Do you want to be able to walk to the shops? Do you want to be able to take care of yourself, do your ADLs, dress yourself, wash yourself, bathe yourself? So all these things that you do now when you're in your kind of working life, it'll be paying dividends as you get older. And also strength training is really good for the uptake of so things like insulin resistance can be assisted with resistance training. So inflammation as well is really helped by resistance training. And there's a number of different conditions that can be ameliorated, or the symptoms at least can be ameliorated through resistance training. So things like diabetes, depression, cardiovascular disease, lots of types of cancers, things like cardiovascular disease groups like stroke, PVD, a lot of pulmonary disorders. So a lot of COPD groups will have incorporated a strength training program as well. I'm sure if there's any physios in the group, they'll be well aware of that. As I said, this doesn't mean that you have to go out and join a gym or buy lots of complex equipment. It can be something that can be done in your home. There's lots of resources available online that you can look up that can be done in homes as well, like YouTube tutorials and things like that. If you do have a medical history that you're just concerned about, maybe just mention it to your GP before you start, just to say that you're starting to think about doing exercise like this if you're concerned. But for the vast majority of people, it's absolutely perfectly safe to do resistance training. And as I said, there's lots of home-based resistance exercise training programs out there, but they're really, really straightforward to follow. And this is kind of more designed for an older person, obviously, because usually I give this talk to older people. But if it's something that you want to start off with, you've never done resistance training before and you're totally intimidated, that's totally fine. It's something you can maybe start at home. And then if you think that you're comfortable maybe moving into a class setting, a group setting, or a gym setting, maybe it's just something that you might explore in your own time. And as I said, it's never too late to start muscle building exercise. So just because you've never done it before doesn't mean you can't start. So these are two kind of exemplars of active aging and being physically active and well as you get older. So Johanna Quas, as per my last Google check, I think she's still competing as a German gymnast. And Willie Murphy, she's a deadlift champion in the United States. And her highest deadlift was 225 pounds. I think that was a few years ago now, but still, she's doing really well. And balance as well. So balance is one of these things that, again, sometimes for whatever reason in the media tends to get a little bit neglected, but it's really, really important. And it's something that you can train in kind of in accordance with your strength training as well. So this is things like when you need to do your ADLs as you get older, minimizing your falls risk as you get older. So there's a number of different inputs that are associated with balance. So your sensory input from your eyes, your ears, upper kind of brain processing power, and then obviously your muscles are needed as well to be able to stabilize yourself. And it does naturally decline with age, like a lot of these things, but it's very, very, very trainable. So I'm sure any physios in the room will kind of be of a similar mindset that it's very easy to train balance. So an easy test that you can do maybe this evening when you're brushing your teeth is, can you stand on one leg with your eyes closed for 10 to 20 seconds? And if you can do that, that's brilliant. Just try and train yourself to do it a bit longer and try both legs. Just make sure that maybe you have a sink nearby that you can put your hands out if you feel that you're getting a little bit unsteady or something like that. But it's a really important skill to have, and you can test your about dynamic balance as well with, again, there's lots of resources online if you're interested. And flexibility as well, again, one of these ones that probably doesn't get enough attention, but a lot of people would get a lot of mileage out of things like yoga, Pilates, Tai Chi, dance. So flexibility and dance go very, very closely together. So a lot of yoga classes, Pilates classes have a very kind of comprehensive stretching program, either before as a warm up or as a wind down. And yoga and Pilates are absolutely excellent exercises if you're looking to have kind of a multimodal exercise that incorporates strength, balance, and flexibility. So yeah. And then adequate nutrition as well. So we always talk in TILDA about the importance of a kind of a Mediterranean, what we'll call a Mediterranean diet, which is moving away from animal fats and focusing more on vegetable fats. But we know this is a lot of kind of the nutrients that we specifically look at in TILDA, which I'll talk about now. So we have vitamin D, which is very important for bone and muscle health. It's involved in immune function and unfortunately does naturally decline with aging. Vitamin B12 is associated with chronic conditions associated with aging. A lot of the it's sometimes people have B12 deficiency as they get older. Folate is associated with cognitive health and depression. Sometimes it's fortified in certain foods, and it can also mask B12 deficiency. And then finally, lutein and zeaxanthin. So they're important for things like your prevention of the risk of macular degeneration, cognitive decline, and overall endothelial dysfunction. So interestingly, when we look at the blood samples that we take from our participants and we compare the content of these micronutrients in their bloods, we can see that for the people who have lower micronutrients, they tend to be more severely classified as either frail, either via the frailty phenotype or frailty index. So the phenotype is kind of a physical frailty manifestation, whereas a frailty index is all encompassing. So we know that the importance of the micronutrients that we've listed here are really, really associated with your aging success as you get older. So you're less likely to require, if you have, as I said, if you have these micronutrients in adequate numbers, you're less likely to require hospitalization, less likely to require overnight stays, more likely to return to your baseline. These are all the factors associated with frailty as you get older. So, and a big thing as well as we get older is nutrition. So the relationship between muscle mass and protein intake is basically never the twain shall not meet. So you need to have about 1 kg per body weight, 1 gram per kg of body weight per day to maintain adequate muscle mass. So for example, if you're about 65 kgs, about 52 to 65 grams per day of protein is kind of what's recommended. And there's loads of different sources of protein. So either plant or animal protein can be garnered from things like chickpeas, porridge is a really good source, tofu, quinoa, brown rice, lentils. And then in terms of animal proteins, things like chicken breast, salmon, tuna, eggs is really good, turkey mince. So they're probably the most densely concentrated content of things with protein in them. And an idea of like a daily breakdown of a high protein diet would be something like eggs, turkey, bacon, and cheese for breakfast, a yogurt, Greek yogurt and berry snack, and then tuna salad for your lunch. And then your dinner could be something like salmon, sweet potato, and broccoli. So it's a really nice kind of high protein full day. So we do look at sleep as well in TILDA. So we talk about what we call the sleep chronotypes. So this is the preferred sleep timings. So the idea of early birds and night owls is actually, there is evidence to support this as well. So it's driven by your internal circadian rhythm, and it's influenced by different things like environmental and social stimuli, and also your own genes. So in TILDA, we have looked at the relationship between what your chronotype is as you go kind of through the aging trajectory. So when you're younger, you like to get up very early, and then as you kind of come into your teens, that kind of tends to get later and later and later. And then in your 20s and 30s, your chronotype tends to drift back into the preference for early times. So we've looked at that in, we've looked at that in TILDA. So as you get a little bit older, kind of into your 80s and 90s, it's not as clear, that relationship isn't as clear with age, because there's just a lot of different varying factors. So things like your health status, your living situation might determine what time you get out of bed. But there is kind of a very strong pattern of that natural preference to get up earlier and earlier and go to bed earlier as you get older. So we have our larks, which are the people who like to get up early, which is in TILDA was about 38% of our population at wave 1. We have our owls who prefer to get up at late, so that's about 6%, which is much, much less. And then we have our wrens who are in the middle, so they kind of have the option to either get up a little bit early or a little bit later. The data that we got back wasn't as clear where we could kind of put them into one category or the other, which is about 56% of our cohort. So the interesting thing about sleep chronotype is that it's associated with different health factors. So the late chronotypes are the people who prefer to get up late and staying up late are associated with a reduction in health quality of life, physical activity, less likely to be physically active, their physical and mental health, their self-report is lower, and also their behavioral health in terms of smoking, alcohol, and diet and exercise and all that is kind of tends to be lower. And interestingly, the dementia risk increases twofold in this population. Now, as I said, they're a very, very small proportion of our cohort in TILDA, but it is interesting that the research supports this. So the old adage that early to bed and early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy and wise is also quite true. So it's just maybe something to think about in your own sleep patterns as well. So the final poll, if Aoife would be so kind, is what age should we retire? So I've put in a couple of options here, 65, 66, 67 or 70. And I hope I don't anger anyone with this poll. This is obviously just a bit of crack. I'll give you a couple more minutes to answer. So very strong preference for age 65. That's great. So when I usually do this poll, it's usually in person and we can have a bit of chat about it. So I'm sorry if this doesn't really work in this setting, but what I would normally say is we give a lot of different options for retiring, so that can be any age. And the reason that I talk about this is that the concept of retirement age was invented in the 1800s by this guy called Otto von Bismarck. I'm sure some of you have come across him before, but he was the German chancellor at the time, and he was responsible for financial planning. He was kind of like Jack Chambers yesterday, the budget guy, and he was politically threatened by this group of socialists who were coming up in the opposition in the 1880s, I think it was when he was in office. So he introduced this mandatory retirement age because he thought it would benefit him politically, in that he thought that if people thought that they were going to get funding from the state to retire, it would basically win them both. So he's invented this arbitrary age of retirement, which is just carried on through to today. And this is the kind of, when we talk about retirement, where we were saying earlier about rethinking retirement, this is kind of where I'm coming from, because we know in TILDA that financial planning for retirement is really important, but it's not necessarily the be all and end all. So it is positively associated as you get older. Income is positively associated with quality of life in those age 50 and older. But when you get retired, the income that you're getting into your pocket every day, so your actual income, is more closely associated with your quality of life than your income replacement rate. So replacing what you were earning kind of in your working life is not as important. It's the actual income that's in your pocket every day. And this is kind of where we're talking about financial planning for the future, is that just thinking about your pension. So we ask our participants, or at least we ask them at wave 1, have you a pension in place? And a lot of them, I think it was about 37% of those in the cohort who weren't retired didn't have a pension in place other than the state pension. So it's, again, just something to think about as you get older, just for that security and for your own quality of life, and just to think about kind of future planning and advanced planning as well for yourself. And we know that retirement is very positively associated with quality of life. So people tend to have a very, very good quality of life as they retire. People would report things like having less stress, more time to spend with their family, more time to socialize and volunteer. And a lot of our participants, there's a female demographics particularly who'd said they had more time to spend with their grandchildren, and then that was a huge association in terms of their quality of life as they get older. So it doesn't necessarily decline at retirement. There's a misconception that once you retire, quality of life goes down, but we don't actually see that at all. And again, as I said, one of the outlets that we've explored in TILDA in terms of creative activities, we've done a report with Creative Ireland where we looked at how people exercise their creative minds, and we look at things like, did they go to the theatre, did they play music, did they participate in things like music, choir, theatre, did they paint, did they do photography? So we kind of give them a pretty much exhaustive list of things that they might be able to do, and we ask them how often did they participate. And then we look at things in terms of their quality of life and other outcomes. So what we saw, especially during the COVID pandemic, was that people who had a creative outlet or who reported that they had a creative outlet were associated with having better psychological health during the pandemic, less worry, lower loneliness, and lower depression levels and lower stress, especially during the lockdowns. It was really positively associated with all of these factors. So not only does it protect against your risk of dementia, but it also has a lot of other benefits as well. And then we know from TILDA as well that volunteering and social participation is associated with higher quality of life, lower depressive symptoms, and overall less disability as we get older as well. So we've kind of launched this report in 2016. Our Way Forward report focused very heavily on socialising, and we saw the people who had neighbourhoods where there was a lot of social cohesion, where people reported that they had high levels of social connectedness with their neighbourhoods, were associated with better mental and physical health, and also people who had a trust in their physical environment, so their neighbours, their people in their neighbourhood, that they kind of felt that they could trust them. That was associated as well with high quality of life and better social connectedness, as would stand to reason. And we saw this especially in the rural areas if there was a higher quality of life. So this is just kind of some of the outcomes where we looked at the benefits of volunteering in terms of their quality of life and depressive symptoms. So you can see that the people who do volunteer had higher quality of life scores, and they also had higher or lower depressive symptoms. And when we looked at active and social participation, and there was a lot of crossover in this group, because a lot of the people who volunteered saw their volunteering as a social outlet for themselves, and also it improved their physical activity levels. So the people who reported participation in social and active participation had higher quality of life, and also reported less depressive symptoms as well. And the thing that's often neglected as we get older is sexuality and sexual satisfaction. So we ask about this in TILDA as well. So some people don't like to answer, and that's totally fine. But of the people who do answer, we get really nice data, and it's really interesting to see the differences in men versus women. So what we can see from the TILDA data is that women's changes in sexual interest and activity are more associated with their emotional mental health or their relationship stress, whereas men's is tied to their physical health. So the women need the emotional and the relationship to be kind of to bolster their sexual interest, whereas for men it's more tied to their physical health. And we know that sexual activity in TILDA is related to things like age, so it tends to decline as we get older. Obviously in married couples it's higher in married and cohabiting couples as opposed to single people. Their health status, so people who report higher and better health report more frequent sexual activity. Mental health and relationships and quality of life and perceptions of aging are also two very prominent predictors of sexuality and sexual satisfaction as well. And pet ownership, as I said, so one of the things that our participants were really focused on when we went out to their PPI group is that we never ask about their pets. And a lot of people would say that their pets are really important to them, and they're a really good social outlet. They're a reason to get up out of bed in the morning, and they're also an outlet for being physically active. So we commissioned, the participants asked us to commission this report, and we included some questions in our more recent waves. And we found that about half of our participants had some sort of a pet, so either a dog, and then a cat, dogs were about 38% and 21% of the population had a cat. Dog owners were more likely to be physically active. They were more likely to be achieving that 150 minutes per week of walking or physical activity. They were more likely to have higher grip strength, and they were also more likely to report more social leisure activities, better social relationships than people who walk their dog less frequently or people who are not dog owners at all. So that was a really interesting finding, and it was kind of really welcomed by the participants because it's something that means a lot to themselves. So that's pretty much it from me. As I said, the message, as I said, is that the vast majority of factors associated with aging are modifiable risk factors, and they're things like multimodal exercise, nutrition, having a positive attitude is a big thing, planning for your future, creative outlets, socializing, volunteering, and thinking about your retirement as well, because the big thing that influences aging is not just your chronological age or not just your biological age, but it's really just you and your attitude, your experiences and your personal perceptions, and what you want for yourself as you get older. So that's it for me.